Grace. She's 10 years old and she showed up at my door with a baby in her arms and asked me for work. She reminds me of you in some ways. Stubborn, brave, too wise for her age. She's the one who told me to write this letter. She said pride is a cold bed partner. She's right. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I don't know if I've earned that. But I'm asking you to know that I think about you every day, that I keep your picture on my nightstand, that I never stopped being proud of you, even when I was too stupid to say it. If you can find it in yourself to write back, I'll be here. Waiting. Your father, Samuel. He sealed the letter before he could change his mind. In the morning, he'd take it to town, send it to the last address he had for Thomas, and hope. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Grace watched him seal the envelope, her expression soft. You did it. I did it. How do you feel? Samuel considered the question. Scared, hopeful, like I'm standing on the edge of something. That's how big changes feel. Grace smiled. Mama always said the scariest part is the first step. After that it gets easier. Does it? I don't know, but I'm willing to find out. Samuel looked at this girl, this child who had walked into his life and turned everything upside down, who had asked for work and given him hope, who had reminded him what it meant to be alive. Thank you, Grace. For what? For showing up, for staying, for... He searched for words. For not giving up on me. Grace's eyes were bright. You didn't give up on us either. I almost did. But you didn't. That's what counts. The fire crackled. Lily slept. Outside, the wind whispered through the prairie grass. And in the quiet warmth of that farmhouse, two broken people held onto the fragile thread of hope they'd woven together. The letter went out on a Tuesday morning, carried by the mail rider into a world that suddenly felt full of terrifying possibilities. Samuel watched until the rider disappeared over the horizon, then stood at the gate for a long time, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, wondering if he'd just made the best decision of his life or the worst. Grace found him there an hour later, still staring at the empty road. He won't write back today, she said gently. These things take time. I know. Then come inside. Lily's been asking for you. Samuel turned, one eyebrow raised. Lily's 5 months old. She can't ask for anything. She fusses less when you're holding her. That's her way of asking. Despite everything, Samuel felt his mouth twitch. You're making that up. Maybe. But it got you to stop staring at that road, didn't it? She had him there. They walked back to the house together, and Samuel tried to push the letter out of his mind. There was work to do. Fences to mend, animals to feed, a farm to run. He couldn't spend every day watching for the mail rider like a lovesick fool. But he did anyway. Every morning, every afternoon, his eyes would drift toward the road, searching for a horse and rider, searching for news. Days passed. A week. 2 weeks. Nothing came. Grace watched him withdraw, watched the hope drain slowly from his eyes. She tried to fill the silence with chatter, with questions about the farm, with stories about Lily's small milestones. First smile. First laugh. First time grabbing Samuel's finger and refusing to let go. But she could see the doubt creeping back in the old familiar weight settling on his shoulders. He'll write, she said one evening 3 weeks after the letter went out. He just needs time. Or he threw it away. You don't know that. I don't know anything. Samuel's voice was bitter. That's the problem. Grace set down her mending and looked at him directly. You know what I know. I know that you're a good man who made mistakes and is trying to fix them. I know that your son loved you once, and love like that doesn't just disappear. I know that... A knock at the door cut her off. They both froze. Nobody knocked on Samuel's door. Nobody came to the farm unannounced. Even Martha Brennan sent word ahead when she planned to visit. Samuel rose slowly, his hand moving instinctively toward the rifle mounted above the fireplace. Stay here, he murmured to Grace. Keep Lily quiet." He crossed to the door and pulled it open. A man stood on the porch, tall and broad-shouldered with dark hair and eyes the color of strong coffee. He wore a city coat and carried a leather bag, and he looked like he'd been traveling for days. Samuel's heart stopped. "Thomas." "Hello, Father." The silence stretched between them, heavy with 5 years of distance. Samuel couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't do anything but stare at the son he'd thought he'd lost forever. Thomas shifted his weight. "I got your letter." "I see that. Can I come in?" Samuel stepped aside, his legs moving on instinct while his mind struggled to catch up. Thomas walked past him into the house, his eyes sweeping the room, taking in the changes. His gaze landed on Grace, standing by the fireplace with Lily in her arms. "You must be Grace." Grace nodded, her expression cautious. "And you're Thomas. Samuel's told me about you. Has he—" Thomas looked at his father. "I wasn't sure he remembered I existed." The words hit Samuel like a slap. "Thomas, I'm not here to fight." Thomas held up a hand. "I've done enough of that. I came because—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "I came because your letter was the first thing you've said to me in 5 years that sounded like the father I remember." Samuel felt his throat close up. "I should have written sooner." "Yeah, you should have. I was proud, stubborn, convinced you were right." Thomas's voice was flat, but something flickered in his eyes. "I know. I was the same way." Grace cleared her throat softly. "I should give you two some privacy. Come on, Lily. Let's go check on the chickens." "In the dark?" Samuel asked. "Chickens don't mind." Grace moved toward the door, pausing beside Thomas. "He's been watching the road every day since he sent that letter. Waiting for you. I thought you should know." She slipped outside before Thomas could respond, taking Lily and her quiet wisdom with her. Father and son stood alone in the firelight. "She's something," Thomas said finally. "She is. Your letter said she showed up with a baby, asked for work." "That's right." Thomas shook his head slowly. "And you let her stay. The man who couldn't let his own son pursue his dreams opened his door to a stranger." "She wasn't a stranger." The words came out before Samuel could stop them. "Not after the first day. She was just... She needed help. And I needed—" He stopped, unable to finish. "Needed what?" Samuel looked at his son, at the man Thomas had become, and felt all the words he'd held back for 5 years pressing against his chest. "I needed a reason to stop dying," he said quietly. "And she gave me one." Thomas's expression shifted. The hardness cracked just a little, revealing something softer underneath. "Mom died," he said. "You said in your letter. 3 years ago." "Yes." "Why didn't you tell me—" "I tried to find you. Wrote to the last address I had. Letter came back undeliverable. I moved. Several times." Thomas's voice was thick. "I should have told you. You didn't owe me anything, not after how we left things." "That's not true." Thomas stepped closer, his eyes bright. "You were my father. She was my mother. I should have been here. I should have—" His voice broke. "I should have said goodbye." Samuel reached out and gripped his son's shoulder, feeling the solid reality of him, the proof that he was actually here. "She knew you loved her. She always knew." "Did she know I was sorry for leaving?" "She knew." Samuel's voice cracked. "She wrote to you, didn't she, about a year after you left?" Thomas nodded. "She told me to come home. I was too proud." "Pride runs in this family." "Yeah." Thomas let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "I noticed." They stood there for a long moment, two stubborn men who'd wasted 5 years being angry at each other. Finally, Samuel spoke. "I'm sorry, Thomas, for everything. For trying to keep you here when you needed to go. For not listening. For letting my fear push you away. I'm sorry too, for leaving the way I did, for not coming back when Mom got sick, for being so damn angry for so long. Where do we go from here? Thomas looked around the room at the clean floors and the curtains in the windows and the signs of life that hadn't been there when he left. I don't know, he admitted. But I'd like to find out. The door opened, and Grace slipped back inside, Lily fussing against her shoulder. Sorry, she's hungry. It's fine. Samuel moved to take the baby, surprising both Grace and himself. I'll warm the milk. You two should meet properly. He carried Lily to the kitchen, leaving Grace and Thomas standing awkwardly in the firelight. So, Thomas said, you're the girl who saved my father. He saved us. We just showed up. That's not what it sounds like from his letter. Grace shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. We needed each other, that's all. That's not nothing. Thomas studied her face. How old are you, 10? 10 and a half. And you walked 40 miles in a blizzard with a baby. Didn't have much choice. Thomas shook his head. Most grown men wouldn't have made it. You know that, right? Grace didn't answer. She wasn't sure what to say. My mother would have liked you, Thomas said quietly. She always had a soft spot for survivors. Samuel tells me about her sometimes. She sounds wonderful. She was. Thomas's voice was thick. The best person I ever knew. Samuel returned with Lily, who was now contentedly sucking on a milk-soaked cloth. He settled into the chair by the fire, the baby cradled against his chest, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Thomas watched something shifting in his expression. You're different, he said. From how I remember. People change. Not you. You were always the same, stubborn set in your ways. Maybe I got tired of being that man. Samuel looked down at Lily, at her tiny face and trusting eyes. Maybe I figured out that being right wasn't worth being alone. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Then he moved to the chair across from his father and sat down heavily. I've been in Chicago, he said, working construction, saving money. For what? I wasn't sure at first, just felt like I should be building something, working toward something. Thomas met his father's eyes. Now I think maybe I was waiting, for you to ask me to come home. Samuel's throat tightened. I'm asking now. I know. And? Thomas looked around the room again at the home he'd fled 5 years ago. At Grace, standing quietly by the door with her arms wrapped around herself. At his father holding a baby like he'd been doing it all his life. I've got things to settle in Chicago, a job to quit, an apartment to clear out. Samuel's heart sank. I understand. But after that, Thomas paused. After that, I'd like to come back, if you'll have me. The words hit Samuel like sunlight after a long winter. He couldn't speak, couldn't do anything but nod, his eyes burning. Grace smiled, small and quiet. I'll make up the spare room. You don't have to. It's no trouble. She moved toward the hallway. Besides, your family. Family takes care of each other. She disappeared down the hall, leaving the word hanging in the air between father and son. Family. Thomas cleared his throat. She really is something. She really is. How'd you get so lucky? Samuel looked down at Lily, at the baby, who had come into his life wrapped in rags and desperation, who had somehow become as precious to him as breath. I opened a door, he said simply. She did the rest. The next 3 days were the strangest and best of Samuel's life. Thomas stayed sleeping in the room that had once been his, walking the land he'd grown up on, rediscovering the father he'd left behind. They talked, really talked for the first time in years. About Eleanor, about the farm, about all the things they'd never said when they had the chance. Thomas visited his mother's grave, a simple marker on the hill behind the house, and Samuel stood beside him while he wept. Grace kept her distance, sensing that this was something father and son needed to do alone. But she was always there in the background, keeping the house running, keeping Lily fed, keeping the fragile peace from shattering. On the third night, Thomas made an announcement. I need to go back to Chicago, settle my affairs. Samuel nodded, his chest tight. How long? A month? Maybe less. And then I come home. Thomas met his father's eyes. For good this time. You mean that? I mean it. They shook hands, then awkwardly embraced. It was stiff and uncomfortable and perfect. Take care of them while I'm gone, Thomas said, pulling back. Grace and Lily, they're important. I know. No, I mean really important. Thomas's expression was serious. That girl, she's special. Don't let anyone take her away. A chill ran down Samuel's spine. Why would anyone take her away? She mentioned an aunt. In Omaha. Someone who sent her away. Prudence Whitfield. That's the one. Thomas frowned. People like that, they don't stay gone forever, especially not when they think they've got a claim. Samuel thought about Grace's words from weeks ago. She'll come looking. Aunt Prudence. She'll realize we're not at the orphanage, and she'll come looking. I'll protect them, he said firmly. Whatever it takes. Good. Thomas gripped his shoulder. Because something tells me you're going to have to. The morning Thomas left, Grace stood on the porch with Lily in her arms, watching Samuel say goodbye to his son. Travel safe, Samuel said. I will. Write when you get there. I'll write. They stood there, two men who'd spent 5 years apart and 3 days finding their way back to each other. I love you, son. The words came out rough, unpracticed. Samuel couldn't remember the last time he'd said them out loud. Thomas's eyes went bright. I love you too, Dad. Then he climbed onto his horse and rode away toward the road toward Chicago, toward the life he was leaving behind. Samuel watched until he disappeared, then turned to find Grace standing beside him. He'll come back, she said. I know. You don't look like you know. I'm trying to believe it. Grace shifted Lily to one arm and slipped her free hand into his. It was such a small gesture, a child's gesture, but it anchored him somehow, kept him from floating away on the tide of fear and hope. Believe it, she said. He's coming back. We're staying. Everything's going to be all right. Samuel looked down at their joined hands, at this girl who'd walked into his life and turned everything upside down. How do you know? Because we found each other. Grace smiled. And that's not nothing. That's everything. 2 weeks after Thomas left, the trouble came. Grace was in the kitchen kneading bread dough when she heard the wagon approaching. It was too early for the mail rider, and Martha Brennan always sent word before visiting. Her hands stilled. Samuel. He appeared in the doorway, already reaching for his coat. I heard it. Are you expecting anyone? No. They went to the window together, watching as a hired wagon rolled up the long drive. A woman sat in the back, dressed in city clothes, her face pinched and cold. Grace's stomach dropped. It's her, she whispered. It's Aunt Prudence. Samuel's hand found her shoulder, heavy and warm. Stay inside. Let me handle this. But, Grace, stay inside. She nodded, though every instinct screamed at her to run, to hide, to grab Lily and disappear into the prairie. Samuel walked out onto the porch, his shoulders squared, his face hard. Prudence Whitfield climbed down from the wagon with the help of a man Grace didn't recognize. Her eyes swept over the farm, dismissive and calculating. Mr. McAllister, I presume. Mrs. Whitfield, can't say I'm pleased to meet you. Prudence's lips thinned. I see you've been expecting me. Grace said you might come looking. Didn't believe her at first. Figured any woman who'd abandoned children in winter wouldn't bother tracking them down. I didn't abandon anyone. I made arrangements. You put them on a coach to an orphanage in December. I did what I had to do. Prudence's voice was cold. Now I've come to collect what's mine. Nothing here is yours. Those children are my sister's daughters. My blood. I have legal rights. Samuel's jaw tightened. Rights you gave up when you sent them away. I've reconsidered. Prudence stepped forward, her eyes hard. The girls will come with me. Over my dead body. Grace couldn't stay inside any longer. She pushed through the door, Lily clutched against her chest. You don't want us, she said, her voice shaking. You never wanted us. So why are you here? Prudence's expression flickered. Grace, you're looking better. Because someone actually took care of us, fed us, kept us warm. Grace lifted her chin. Something you didn't bother to do. I had no choice. You had plenty of choices. You chose to send us away. This isn't the time for childish dramatics. Prudence's voice sharpened. You're coming with me, both of you, now. No. You don't get to say no. I'm your guardian. You're not her guardian, Samuel interrupted. Not anymore. Prudence turned to him, her eyes narrowing. What are you talking about? I filed for legal guardianship 2 weeks ago. Judge Morrison in the county seat has the papers. Samuel's voice was flat. As of now, Grace and Lily are in my custody pending a hearing. Prudence's face went white, then red. You can't do that. I already did. I'll fight it. You're welcome to try. They faced each other, two forces of will colliding. Grace watched her heart pounding Lily's small body warm against her chest. Finally, Prudence spoke. This isn't over, Mr. McAllister. Those girls belong with family, real family. And when I prove that in court, you'll have nothing. Real family doesn't abandon children in winter, Samuel said quietly. Real family shows up. Real family fights. I've done both. Prudence's mouth twisted. She turned to Grace, her expression cold. You'll regret this, girl. Choosing a stranger over your own blood. He's not a stranger. Grace's voice was steady now, her fear transforming into something harder. He's my family, and you never will be. Prudence stared at her for a long moment. Then she turned and climbed back into the wagon. I'll see you in court, she called as the wagon pulled away. All of you. Samuel and Grace watched until the wagon disappeared over the horizon. Then Samuel turned to her, his face pale but determined. We need a lawyer. Can we afford one? We'll find a way. He put his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. Whatever it takes, Grace, I'm not losing you. Grace leaned into him, feeling his strength, his warmth, his fierce, stubborn love. You won't, she whispered. I promise. The fight was coming, but for the first time in her life, Grace Lawson wasn't facing it alone. The days after Prudence's visit passed in a blur of preparation and worry. Samuel rode into town the next morning and returned with news that made Grace's stomach clench. Prudence had already filed her petition. The hearing was set for 3 weeks out. Judge Morrison would decide everything. 3 weeks, Grace whispered. That's not much time. It's enough. Samuel's voice was firm, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. We'll be ready. Martha Brennan arrived that afternoon, her face grave but determined. She'd heard about Prudence's visit from the wagon driver who'd stopped at the general store to water his horses and spread gossip. The whole town's talking, Martha said, settling into a chair while Grace poured coffee. Most folks are on your side, Samuel. They've seen how those girls have flourished here. Most folks don't sit on the judge's bench. No, but their testimony might help. Martha leaned forward. I'll speak for you. So will Reverend Webb. The Coopers, the Hendersons, even old Tom Richter said he'd come to court if it would help. Grace felt tears prick her eyes. They'd do that for us. Child, you've been here less than 2 months, and you've already become part of this community. Martha reached over and squeezed her hand. That counts for something. Samuel was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. I don't know how to thank you, Martha. Don't thank me yet. We haven't won anything. She stood brushing off her skirt. Now let's talk strategy. What exactly are we up against? They spent the rest of the afternoon planning. Martha had experience with the court system, her late husband having been involved in several land disputes over the years. She knew how these things worked, what arguments carried weight, what evidence mattered. Blood relation is powerful, she admitted. Judges don't like separating children from family, but they also don't like seeing children mistreated. If we can prove Prudence abandoned them, prove she sent them out into the world with nothing. Grace can testify to that, Samuel said. She'll have to, and it won't be easy. Martha looked at Grace, her expression gentle but serious. They'll try to twist your words, child, make you doubt yourself, make you seem ungrateful or difficult. Can you handle that? Grace thought about the long walk through the snow, the doors that had closed in her face, the desperate hope that had kept her moving when everything else had given out. I can handle anything, she said. For Lily. The letter arrived 4 days before the hearing. Samuel was in the barn when the mail rider came. Grace took the envelope, her heart hammering when she saw the Chicago postmark. She ran to find Samuel waving the letter above her head. It's from Thomas. It came. Samuel wiped his hands on his pants and took the envelope. His fingers trembled slightly as he opened it. Grace watched his face as he read, watched the emotions play across his weathered features. Hope, relief, something that might have been joy. He's coming, Samuel said, his voice cracking. He settled his affairs early. He'll be here day after tomorrow. Before the hearing. 2 days before. Grace threw her arms around him the way she might have hugged her father if she'd ever known him. Samuel stiffened for just a moment, then his arms came around her, holding her tight. We're going to be all right, she whispered against his chest. All of us. Yeah. His voice was rough. I'm starting to believe that. Thomas arrived on a cold, clear morning, stepping off the train at Miller's Crossing, with a bag in one hand and a thick folder of papers in the other. Grace watched from the wagon as Samuel walked toward his son. They embraced on the platform, awkward but real. Then Thomas turned and saw her. Grace. He smiled, and it transformed his serious face. You're looking well. So are you. She climbed down from the wagon, Lily bundled against her chest. What's in the folder? Insurance. Thomas held it up. I've got a friend in Chicago, a lawyer. He helped me gather some information about Mrs. Prudence Whitfield. Samuel frowned. What kind of information? The kind that might help us win. They rode back to the farm, Thomas explaining as they went. His lawyer friend had connections in Omaha, people who knew Prudence and her husband. The picture they'd painted wasn't pretty. Prudence's husband, Walter, he's in financial trouble, Thomas said. Bad investments, gambling debts. They've been selling off assets for months. What's that got to do with Grace and Lily? Think about it, Father. Thomas's voice was grim. Why would a woman who didn't want 2 orphans suddenly come looking for them? Why now? Grace felt cold, despite the blanket wrapped around her. She wants something. She wants money. Thomas pulled a document from the folder. I did some digging. Your mother Grace, your grandmother on her side, owned property in Missouri, land that passed to Harriet when the grandmother died. Mama never mentioned any land. She might not have known, or she might have been waiting until you were old enough to understand. Thomas handed her the document. According to the county records, that land now belongs to you and Lily, both of you as Harriet's surviving children. Grace stared at the paper, trying to make sense of the legal language. I don't understand. Prudence does. Samuel's voice was hard. That's why she wants you back. Not because you're family. Because you're valuable. It's not about the land itself, Thomas continued. The property isn't worth much, just a few acres of farmland, but there's been talk of the railroad expanding through that area. If that happens, whoever controls your inheritance could sell to the highest bidder. Grace felt sick. She doesn't want us. She wants what we can give her. I'm sorry, Grace. Don't be. She straightened something hardening in her chest. Now we know the truth. Now we can fight. The night before the hearing, Grace couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, Lily peaceful beside her, staring at the ceiling and trying to quiet the fear that churned in her stomach. Footsteps in the hallway. A soft knock. "Grace?" Samuel's voice quiet. "You awake?" "Yes." He pushed the door open and stood there silhouetted against the lamplight from the hall. "Thought you might want company." "I'm all right." "No, you're not." He crossed to the bed and sat on the edge, his weight making the mattress dip. "Neither am I." They sat in silence for a moment. Lily made a small sound and settled again. "What if we lose?" Grace whispered. "We won't." "But what if we do? What if the judge decides blood matters more than anything else?" Samuel was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Do you remember what you told me that first night when I asked why you came to my gate?" Grace nodded. "I said I saw the gate was broken but still standing. I thought you might understand." "I didn't at the time. Understand, I mean. But I think I do now." Samuel turned to look at her, his eyes bright in the darkness. "We're both broken, Grace. You, me, this whole farm. But we're still standing, and that's not nothing." "It's everything," Grace whispered. "It's everything," he agreed. "So whatever happens tomorrow, whatever that judge decides, you remember that. We're still standing, and we'll keep standing no matter what." Grace reached out and took his hand, her small fingers wrapping around his calloused ones. "I'm scared, Samuel." "I know, me too. But I'm also glad that I found you, that you let us stay." "I'm glad too." His voice was rough. "More than I know how to say." They sat there until Lily stirred for her midnight feeding, until the fear had faded to something manageable. Then Samuel stood, squeezed Grace's hand one more time, and went back to his room. Grace fed her sister in the darkness, humming the lullaby her mother used to sing. And for the first time since Prudence's visit, she felt something like peace. The courthouse was bigger than Grace expected, a solid brick building that dominated the center of the county seat. People milled about outside, more people than Grace had ever seen in one place. She gripped Samuel's hand as they climbed the steps, Lily in her other arm. Thomas walked beside them, the folder of documents clutched under his arm. Martha Brennan had arrived earlier with Reverend Webb, and they waited at the top of the stairs. "Ready?" Samuel asked. Grace nodded. "Ready?" They walked inside. The courtroom was stuffy and crowded. Prudence sat on one side with her lawyer, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit. She didn't look at Grace when they entered. Didn't acknowledge her at all. Good, Grace thought. Let her pretend I don't exist. I'll make sure the judge knows different. Judge Morrison called the hearing to order. He was an older man with sharp eyes and a stern face, and he looked at both parties with equal suspicion. Prudence's lawyer spoke first, painting a picture of a devoted aunt who had taken in her orphaned nieces out of duty and love. He talked about the difficult circumstances, the impossible choices, the pain of separation. Grace listened, her stomach churning. He made it sound so reasonable, so kind. Then it was their turn. Thomas stood. "Your Honor, I'd like to present evidence that Mrs. Whitfield's motives are not as pure as her counsel suggests." He laid out the documents, the financial records, the property claims. He explained about the land in Missouri, about the railroad rumors, about the timing of Prudence's sudden interest in her nieces. Prudence's face went white, then red. Her lawyer objected repeatedly, but Judge Morrison allowed the evidence. Then Grace was called to testify. She stood slowly, handing Lily to Martha, and walked to the witness chair. Her legs felt like water, but she kept her chin up, kept her eyes forward. "State your name for the record." "Grace Elizabeth Lawson." "And how old are you, Miss Lawson?" 10 years old, sir." "Can you tell the court in your own words what happened when your mother died?" Grace took a breath. "My mother passed in October, sir. She'd been sick for a long time. After she died, my Aunt Prudence came to collect us. She took us to her house in Omaha. And how long did you stay there? 3 weeks, sir. What happened during those 3 weeks? Grace looked at Prudence, at the woman who had taken one look at her and seen only a burden. My aunt told me I was too expensive to keep. She said her husband didn't want children in the house. She said she'd done her duty by taking us in, but she couldn't do more. What did she do then? She gave me money for a coach ticket and told me to take Lily to the county orphanage in Lincoln. The courtroom murmured. Judge Morrison held up a hand for silence. She sent you a 10-year-old girl with an infant to travel alone to an orphanage. Yes, sir. In December, in the middle of winter. Yes, sir. What happened next? Grace's voice steadied. I got off the coach at the first stop. I'd heard what happens to babies in orphanages, how they separate siblings. I wasn't going to let anyone take Lily from me. So you walked? Yes, sir. For 3 days. I knocked on every door I could find, asked for help. Nobody would take us in. Grace felt tears threatening, but she pushed them down. Then I found Mr. McAllister's farm. He was the first person who opened his door. And what happened then? He took us in, fed us, gave us a warm place to sleep. Grace looked at Samuel, at the man who had saved her life. He didn't have to. He didn't know us, but he did it anyway. Why do you think he did that, Miss Lawson? Grace considered the question. Because he understood what it's like to lose everything. Because he knew what it meant to be alone. And because he's a good man, even when he doesn't want to be. The courtroom was silent. Even Prudence's lawyer had stopped objecting. Judge Morrison leaned forward. Miss Lawson, if I rule in your aunt's favor, you'll be required to return to her custody. Do you understand that? Yes, sir. And how do you feel about that possibility? Grace looked at Prudence, at the cold eyes that had never held any warmth for her, at the hands that had pushed her away instead of drawing her close. Then she looked at Samuel, at the man who had taught her that family wasn't about blood. It was about showing up, about staying. My aunt doesn't want me, sir. She never did. She wants what she thinks I can give her. Grace's voice was steady. But Mr. McAllister, he doesn't want anything from me except for me to be happy, to be safe, to have a chance. That's quite a statement from a 10-year-old. I've had to grow up fast, sir. My mama always said I had old eyes. Judge Morrison studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. You may step down, Miss Lawson. The rest of the hearing passed in a blur. Martha testified about Grace's condition when she arrived at the farm. Reverend Webb spoke about Samuel's character, about the transformation he'd witnessed in the man and in his home. Even Mrs. Cooper, who'd been suspicious at first, stood up to say that she'd seen Grace and Lily in church, seen how well cared for they were. Prudence's lawyer tried to counter, tried to paint Samuel as an unsuitable guardian, a stranger with no legal claim. But the evidence was overwhelming. Finally, Judge Morrison called for a recess to consider his decision. They waited outside the courtroom, huddled together on a wooden bench. Grace held Lily close, feeling the baby's warmth, the steady rhythm of her breathing. You did good, Samuel said quietly. In there. What you said. I just told the truth. Sometimes that's the hardest thing. The doors opened. The bailiff called them back inside. Judge Morrison sat behind his desk, his expression unreadable. Grace felt her heart hammering against her ribs. I've heard the testimony, the judge began. I've reviewed the evidence, and I've reached a decision. He looked at Prudence first. Mrs. Whitfield, I'm troubled by what I've heard today. You took in these children, then sent them away with nothing but a coach ticket and a prayer. You showed no concern for their welfare, made no effort to ensure their safety. And now you come before this court, claiming you want them back, when the evidence suggests your motives are financial rather than familial. Prudence's face went pale. Her lawyer started to rise, but she pulled him back down. The judge turned to Samuel. Mr. McAllister, you're not a perfect man. You've made mistakes. You let your pride drive away your own son. But you also opened your door to two children who had nowhere else to go. You gave them food, shelter, safety. You gave them a home." He paused and Grace held her breath. The law places great weight on blood relations. But the law also recognizes that children deserve more than a name and a claim. They deserve love, care, a chance to grow. Judge Morrison straightened in his chair. "Based on the evidence presented, I am granting full legal guardianship of Grace Elizabeth Lawson and Lily Ann Lawson to Samuel McAllister effective immediately. Mrs. Whitfield's petition is denied." The courtroom erupted. Grace couldn't hear anything over the roaring in her ears. She was crying, she realized, tears streaming down her face as Samuel pulled her into a fierce embrace. "We did it," she gasped. "We won. We won," his voice cracked. "You're ours now, legally, forever." Thomas was there too, his hand on her shoulder, his eyes bright. Martha was crying into her handkerchief. Reverend Webb was shaking Samuel's hand and saying something about God's will. And across the room, Prudence Whitfield stood alone, her face twisted with fury and disbelief. She caught Grace's eye for just a moment. Grace held her gaze. Didn't flinch. Didn't look away. Then Prudence turned and walked out of the courtroom, and Grace never saw her again. The ride home was different. Lighter somehow, as if a weight had been lifted from all of them. Grace sat between Samuel and Thomas Lilly, sleeping in her arms, watching the familiar landscape roll by. The fields she'd walked through in desperation. The road she'd traveled with nothing but hope. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we live," Samuel said simply. "We work the farm, raise the crops, take care of each other. Same as before. But different. Yeah, different." He glanced at her. Better. When they reached the farm, Martha and the others were already there setting up a celebration in the yard. Tables had been brought out loaded with food. Lanterns hung from the porch. Half the town seemed to have shown up. Grace stared at the gathering, overwhelmed. "They did all this for us?" "For all of us," Martha said, appearing at her elbow. "This community takes care of its own. And you're one of us now, Grace. Officially." The celebration lasted until the stars came out. Grace ate until she couldn't eat any more, accepted congratulations until her face hurt from smiling, and watched Samuel laugh with neighbors who had once been strangers. This is what family looks like, she thought. Not just blood, but choice, connection, love. When the last guests had gone and the dishes had been cleared, Grace stood on the porch with Lily in her arms, looking out at the dark fields. Thomas came to stand beside her. "Big day." "The biggest." "How do you feel?" Grace considered the question. "Safe," she said finally. "For the first time since Mama died. Maybe for the first time ever." Thomas nodded. "That's how home is supposed to feel." "Is that why you came back? Because it feels safe?" "Partly." He was quiet for a moment. "Mostly I came back because I realized something in Chicago. All those years I spent running away, building a life somewhere else, I was trying to prove I didn't need this place. Didn't need my father." He shook his head. "But the truth is, I was just scared. Scared that if I came back, nothing would have changed. That we'd be the same people making the same mistakes." "But you came back anyway. Because of you." Thomas looked at her. "Because you showed up here with nothing and turned everything around. If a 10-year-old girl could be that brave, I figured a grown man could manage it too." Grace felt tears prick her eyes. "I'm not that brave." "Yes, you are." His voice was firm. "You're the bravest person I've ever met." They stood together in the darkness, listening to the wind whisper through the prairie grass. "Thomas, yeah. I'm glad you came back." "Me too, Grace. Me too." Inside, Samuel was banking the fire for the night. He looked up when they came in, his weathered face soft with contentment. Lily asleep. Out cold. Grace settled into the rocking chair, the baby warm against her chest. I think she wore herself out with all the excitement. We all did. Samuel sat down across from her. It's been a day. It's been a life, Thomas said, settling onto the couch. A whole new life starting right now. They sat together in the quiet house, the fire crackling low, the darkness pressing gentle against the windows. Three people who had been broken, finding their way to whole. Samuel, Grace said softly. Yeah, thank you for everything. He looked at her, this girl who had walked into his life and changed everything, who had asked for work and given him hope, who had reminded him what it meant to be alive. Thank you right back, he said, for not giving up. On yourself, on us, on any of it. Grace smiled, and it felt like the first real smile of her life. I couldn't give up, she said. I had too much to fight for. Winter loosened its grip slowly, the way it always did on the Nebraska prairie. The snow melted in patches, revealing dead grass and frozen earth, then retreated further as the days grew longer. By late March, the first green shoots were pushing through, stubborn and determined, reaching for the weak spring sun. Grace watched the transformation from the kitchen window, Lily balanced on her hip. The baby was bigger now, her cheeks round and pink, her eyes bright with curiosity. She grabbed at everything within reach, including Grace's hair, which she was currently trying to stuff into her mouth. You're getting strong, Lilybug, Grace murmured gently, extracting her braid from tiny fists. Too strong for your own good. Lily gurgled happily, completely unrepentant. Behind them, the kitchen was warm with the smell of baking bread. Grace had found Eleanor's recipe box months ago, had worked through nearly every card, but this particular recipe, a simple wheat bread with honey, had become her favorite. Samuel said it tasted just like the bread Eleanor used to make. Grace wasn't sure if that was a compliment or a bittersweet reminder. Maybe both. The door opened, letting in a gust of cool air and Samuel's heavy footsteps. He stomped mud off his boots and hung his coat on the hook, his movements easier than they'd been when Grace first arrived. Less weighed down. Smells good in here. Bread's almost done. Grace turned from the window. How's the fence? Holding. Thomas is finishing up the last section now. Samuel crossed to the stove and poured himself coffee. Should be done by nightfall. Good. It was ordinary conversation. The kind of conversation families had every day about chores and meals and the small business of living. Grace had spent her whole life dreaming of ordinary. Now she had it, and sometimes she still couldn't believe it was real. Samuel sat down at the table, cradling his coffee cup. He watched Grace move around the kitchen, checking the bread, wiping down the counter, bouncing Lily on her hip. You're good at that, he said. At what? All of it. He gestured vaguely. Taking care of things, making everything run smooth. Grace felt warmth spread through her chest. Mama taught me well. She did. Samuel was quiet for a moment. I've been thinking. About what? About the future. What happens next? Grace's hand stilled on the bread pan. What do you mean? I mean, you've been here almost 4 months now. You've got guardianship settled. You've got a home. Samuel met her eyes. But you haven't been to school. Haven't had a chance to be a regular kid. I'm fine. I know you're fine. That's not what I'm asking. He leaned forward. There's a school in Miller's Crossing. 1 room, 1 teacher, but it's real education. Math, reading, history. Your mama wanted that for you. Grace looked down at Lily. I can't leave her. Martha's offered to watch her during school hours. But, Grace. Samuel's voice was gentle but firm. You've been taking care of everyone else since your mama got sick. Your sister, this house me. It's time someone took care of you. Grace felt tears threatening. She blinked them back. I don't know how to be a regular kid. Nobody's asking you to be regular. Samuel smiled just a little. Just asking you to try being 10 for a while. The door opened again, and Thomas came in brushing dirt from his sleeves. He looked between them, sensing the weight in the air. What did I miss? Samuel wants me to go to school, Grace said. About time. Thomas grinned. You're too smart to be stuck on a farm all day. I'm not stuck. I like it here. I know you do, but liking something doesn't mean it's all you should have. Thomas sat down across from Samuel, reaching over to tickle Lily's chin. Besides, you'd be the smartest kid in that school. You'd probably end up teaching the teacher. Grace laughed despite herself. That's not how school works. Maybe it should be. She looked between them, these two men who had become her family. Samuel, who had opened his door when everyone else closed theirs. Thomas, who had come back from the edge of loss to find something worth staying for. They believed in her. Believed she deserved more than survival. More than just getting by. Maybe it was time she believed it too. All right, she said quietly. I'll try. Samuel's face broke into a real smile. That's my girl. School started the following Monday. Grace walked into the one-room schoolhouse with her heart pounding and her hands trembling, convinced that everyone would see her for what she was, an outsider, an orphan, a girl who didn't belong. Instead, she found 20 children of various ages crammed into wooden desks, all of them staring at her with the same mixture of curiosity and wariness she felt herself. The teacher, a young woman named Miss Peterson, welcomed her warmly. Class, this is Grace Lawson. She'll be joining us from now on. A few whispers, a few pointed looks, but no one laughed. No one sneered. Grace took her seat and tried to breathe. The morning passed in a blur of lessons and recitations. Grace discovered she was ahead in reading, behind in arithmetic, and somewhere in the middle for everything else. Miss Peterson didn't seem bothered by any of it. You'll catch up, she said during the lunch break. You've got a quick mind, I can tell. How can you tell? The way you watch everything. Take it all in. Miss Peterson smiled. Most children your age are too busy fidgeting to really see what's in front of them. You see everything. Grace wasn't sure if that was a compliment or not, but it felt good to be noticed for something other than her circumstances. At recess, a girl named Sarah approached her. She was about Grace's age, with freckles and red hair and a gap between her front teeth. You're the one living with Mr. McAllister, right? The girl who walked through the blizzard. Grace tensed. Yes. That's the bravest thing I ever heard. Sarah's eyes were wide with admiration. My pa said you nearly died, said you had frostbite on your feet and everything. It wasn't that bad. Liar. But Sarah was grinning. Come on. I'll show you where we play at recess. There's a creek behind the schoolhouse, and if you're careful, you can catch frogs. Grace found herself smiling back. I've never caught a frog. Then you haven't lived. Come on. They ran off together, and for the first time in longer than Grace could remember, she felt like a regular kid. The weeks passed, and Grace settled into a new rhythm. School in the mornings, chores in the afternoons, evenings by the fire with Samuel and Thomas. Lily grew bigger every day, crawling now, getting into everything. The house rang with her babbling and her laughter sounds that had been absent for too long. Samuel started taking on more work in town, his reputation spreading as a man who could fix anything, build anything, make broken things whole. He'd rebuilt the church, steps reinforced the general store's sagging floor, even helped the Hendersons raise a new barn after theirs burned down. You're becoming a pillar of the community, Thomas teased one evening. Next thing you know, they'll be asking you to run for mayor. God forbid. But Samuel was smiling. I've got enough on my plate. Thomas had settled into life on the farm with surprising ease. He handled the heavy work, the plowing and planting that Samuel's aging body couldn't manage alone. But he also traveled, sometimes taking surveying jobs for the railroad, bringing back money and stories and small gifts for Grace and Lily. I found this in Omaha, he said one evening, handing Grace a book. Thought you might like it. Grace turned it over in her hands. The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. I've heard of this. It's good. About a boy who gets into trouble and has adventures. Thomas grinned. Reminded me of someone. I don't get into trouble. Not yet. Give it time. Grace laughed and tucked the book under her arm. She'd read it that night by lamplight while Lily slept, and the house settled into its evening quiet. These were the moments she treasured most. The small, ordinary moments that added up to a life. Spring turned to summer, and summer brought long days and hard work. Grace helped with the planting, learning to drop seeds in straight rows to read the soil and the sky. She got sunburned and dirty, and happier than she'd ever been. Her 11th birthday came in July. She'd almost forgotten about it, the date having lost meaning in the chaos of the previous year. But Samuel hadn't forgotten. She woke to the smell of frying bacon and found the kitchen decorated with wildflowers. A small package sat at her place at the table wrapped in brown paper. "What's this? Happy birthday." Samuel's voice was gruff, but his eyes were soft. "Didn't think we'd let it pass without notice, did you?" Grace opened the package with trembling fingers. Inside was a locket, silver old but polished until it gleamed. She opened it and found 2 small photographs, her mother on one side, herself on the other. "Where did you get this?" "The photograph of your mother was in your things from when you arrived. Had the tinsmith in town make copies small enough to fit." Samuel cleared his throat. "The locket was Eleanor's. She'd have wanted you to have it." Grace couldn't speak. She held the locket against her chest and felt tears streaming down her face. "I know it's not much. It's everything." She threw her arms around him, holding tight. "Thank you. Thank you." Thomas appeared in the doorway, Lily on his hip. "Is she crying? It's her birthday. She's not supposed to cry on her birthday." "Happy tears," Grace managed. "The best kind." "Well, in that case, wait until you see what's outside." Grace followed them to the porch, wiping her eyes, and stopped dead. A horse stood in the yard. Not one of the farm horses, but a small chestnut mare with a white blaze on her forehead and kind, gentle eyes. "Her name's Penny," Thomas said. "She's yours." "Mine. Every girl should have a horse." Samuel's voice was rough. "Eleanor always said so." Grace walked down the steps in a daze. The mare nickered softly and pushed her nose against Grace's hand, velvet soft and warm. "She's beautiful," Grace whispered. "She's steady, good-tempered, perfect for learning to ride." Thomas grinned. "I'll teach you if you want." "I want." Grace stroked the mare's neck, still unable to believe this was real. "I want all of it." "Then it's yours." Samuel came to stand beside her. "All of it. The horse, the farm, the family. It's yours, Grace, for as long as you want it." She looked up at him, at this man who had been so broken when she found him, who had somehow put himself back together and helped her do the same. "Forever," she said. "I want it forever." "Then forever it is." The guardianship papers had made it official. The birthday gifts made it feel real. But the moment that changed everything, the moment Grace knew in her bones that she was truly home, came on an ordinary evening in late August. They were sitting on the porch watching the sunset behind the fields. Samuel in his rocking chair, Thomas on the steps. Grace between them with Lily in her lap. The baby was drowsy, her head heavy against Grace's chest. "I've been thinking," Grace said into the comfortable silence. "About what?" "About names." She paused, her heart pounding. "About what I should call you." Samuel's rocking chair stilled. Thomas turned to look at her. "I've been calling you Samuel." Grace continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "And that's fine. It's your name. But I was wondering—" She swallowed hard. "I was wondering if maybe I could call you something else." Samuel's voice was rough. "What did you have in mind?" Grace looked at him, at the weathered face and the kind eyes and the hands that had fed her and sheltered her and never once let her down. "Pa," she said. "I'd like to call you Pa, if that's all right." The silence stretched. Grace felt her courage faltering, felt the fear of rejection creeping in. Then Samuel reached over and took her hand. His grip was strong, steady, warm. "I'd like that," he said, his voice cracking. "I'd like that a lot." Grace felt tears spilling down her cheeks. "Really? Really?" He squeezed her hand. "You're my daughter Grace. In every way that matters. Have been since the day you walked through that gate." Thomas cleared his throat. "Does this mean I'm a brother now officially?" Grace laughed through her tears. "I guess it does." "Good," he grinned. "I always wanted a little sister to boss around." "I don't think that's how it works." "We'll negotiate." They sat together as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. A family formed not by blood, but by choice, by need, by love. Lily stirred in Grace's arms, letting out a small cry. Grace soothed her, automatically humming the lullaby her mother used to sing. "She's getting big," Samuel said. "Too big." Grace smiled down at her sister. "She'll be walking soon. Then we'll really be in trouble." "I remember when Thomas started walking." Samuel's voice was distant, remembering. "Eleanor said it was like trying to catch a tornado. He was into everything." "Some things don't change," Thomas said dryly. They laughed, all of them, and the sound rang out across the quiet prairie. Laughter and love and the simple joy of being together. This is what Grace had walked 40 miles to find. This is what she'd fought for, hoped for, refused to give up on. A home. A family. A place to belong. Fall came with its harvest and its preparations for winter. Grace helped bring in the crops, her hands calloused, now her body strong from months of farm work. She rode Penny every day after school, racing across the fields with Sarah, who had become her closest friend. "You're lucky," Sarah said one afternoon as they sat by the creek watching the leaves drift downstream. "Having a family like yours." "I know." Grace pulled her knees to her chest. "I didn't always have them. I had to find them. That's what makes it special, I think. You chose each other." Grace thought about that, about the cold December day when she'd stood at Samuel's gate with nothing but hope and desperation, about all the doors that had closed before his opened. "Yeah," she said. "We did." The first snow fell in early November, almost exactly 1 year after Grace had arrived at the farm. She stood at the window watching the flakes drift down and felt the memory of that desperate walk pressing against her chest. Samuel found her there, her face pale, her hands gripping the windowsill. "You all right?" "Just remembering." He came to stand beside her. "Hard to believe it's been a year. Sometimes it feels like forever. Sometimes it feels like yesterday. That's how time works when you've been through something hard." Samuel put his arm around her shoulders. "The bad parts fade. The good parts stay." Grace leaned into him. "I was so scared that day. When I knocked on your door, I thought you'd turn us away like everyone else." "I almost did." "Whoa, why didn't you?" Samuel was quiet for a moment. "Because you looked at me like I was your last hope, and nobody had looked at me like that in years." He tightened his arm around her. "I'd forgotten what it felt like to matter to someone. You reminded me. You mattered to Thomas, even when he was gone. I know that now, didn't know it then." Samuel sighed. "Grief does strange things to a man, makes him blind to what's right in front of him. You're not blind anymore." "No." He looked down at her. "Thanks to you." Grace hugged him tight, pressing her face against his chest. "Thanks to both of us. We saved each other." "Yeah." His voice was rough with emotion. "I reckon we did." Christmas came with all its trimmings. Grace decorated the house with evergreen branches and red ribbons the way her mother used to do. Thomas brought home a tree from the woods, and they decorated it together, hanging ornaments that had belonged to Eleanor and new ones they'd made themselves. Lily, now 10 months old, watched everything with wide, wondering eyes. She couldn't understand what was happening, but she knew it was special. She clapped her tiny hands and laughed at the sparkling decorations. On Christmas morning, they gathered in the front room to exchange gifts. Grace had saved her egg money for weeks to buy presents: a new pipe for Samuel, a warm scarf for Thomas, a soft doll for Lily. In return, she received more books, a new dress Martha had sewn, and a wooden box Thomas had carved with her initials on the lid. "For your treasures," he said. "Everyone needs a place to keep their treasures." Grace thought about the locket around her neck, the photographs of her mother, the letters she'd saved from the early days when she was learning to trust. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick, "for everything." "Thank you," Samuel replied, "for giving us something to celebrate again." They ate dinner together, the four of them, at a table laden with food and love. Grace looked around at their faces, at Lily, banging her spoon, at Thomas, stealing an extra roll, at Samuel, watching everything with quiet contentment. This was her family. This was her home, and she would never take it for granted. The years that followed brought changes, as years always do. Grace grew from a child into a young woman, her old eyes seeing more and more of the world. She finished school at the top of her class, and Miss Peterson said she could become a teacher herself if she wanted. Lily grew too, from a baby into a toddler, into a bright, curious child who asked questions about everything and feared nothing. She had no memory of the desperate walk that had brought them here, no knowledge of how close they'd come to losing everything. To her, Samuel was simply Pa, and Thomas was simply her brother, and the farm was simply home. "She's lucky," Thomas said one evening, watching Lily chase fireflies in the yard. "She'll never know what it was like before." "That's what we wanted," Grace replied. "That's what we fought for." "I know. It's just strange sometimes, remembering how it used to be." Grace looked out at the farm, at the fields that were green and thriving, at the gate that stood straight and strong. Samuel had rebuilt it years ago, but he'd kept the old wire coiled and hung in the barn. "So we remember," he'd said when she asked why, "where we started, how far we've come." She understood now. The wire was a reminder that broken things could be mended, that gates could open as easily as they closed. That hope was worth holding on to, even when everything seemed lost. "Grace," Thomas's voice pulled her back. "Sorry, just thinking." "About what?" "About the day I arrived, standing at that gate, not knowing if anyone would help us. And now," Grace smiled, "now I can't imagine being anywhere else." On the 10th anniversary of her arrival, Grace stood at the gate one last time. She was 20 years old now, a woman grown with her mother's determined chin and her own hard-won wisdom. Lily, nearly 11, stood beside her, and behind them Samuel and Thomas waited on the porch. "Why are we out here?" Lily asked, shivering in the November cold. "Because this is where it started." Grace looked at the gate, at the sturdy wood and iron hinges. 10 years ago, I walked through this gate with you in my arms. I didn't know if we'd live or die. I just knew I had to try." Lily was quiet, processing this. She'd heard the story before, but hearing it here, standing where it happened, was different. "You saved us," she said finally. "We saved each other." Grace put her arm around her sister. "All of us, together." They walked back to the house, to the warmth, to the family that had formed itself against all odds. Samuel hugged them both when they came in his arms, still strong, despite his years. Thomas had made hot cider, and the kitchen smelled like cinnamon and apples. "To family," Samuel said, raising his cup. "To home," Thomas added. "To second chances," Grace finished. They drank together, the four of them, and the warmth spread through Grace's chest, chasing away the last chill of winter. That night, after Lily was asleep and Thomas had gone to his room, Grace sat with Samuel by the fire. He was older now, his hair fully gray, his movements slower. But his eyes were still kind, still full of the quiet strength that had saved her all those years ago. "Pa, yeah, thank you." Grace reached over and took his hand. "For opening the door, for letting us stay, for everything." Samuel squeezed her hand. Thank you for knocking. I almost didn't. I almost gave up. But you didn't. No. Grace smiled. I didn't. They sat together in the firelight, father and daughter bound not by blood, but by something stronger. By choice. By love. By the simple, profound act of showing up when it mattered most. Outside, the wind whispered through the prairie grass. The gate stood open the way Samuel always kept it now. Why do you leave it open? Grace had asked once years ago. Because you never know who might need to walk through, he'd replied, and I want them to know they're welcome. She understood now. The open gate was an invitation, a promise, a declaration that this was a place where broken people could find healing, where lost souls could find home. Grace had walked through that gate with nothing but hope and a baby in her arms. She'd found everything she'd ever needed on the other side, and that was the truest thing she knew. The question at the gate had been simple. Can you give us shelter? The answer had changed everything. It had given a dying man a reason to live. It had brought a lost son home. It had saved 2 orphaned girls from a world that didn't want them. It had built a family from the wreckage of grief and loss. And it had proved that love was stronger than blood, that home was more than a place that hope could survive even the coldest winter. Grace Lawson had asked for shelter. Samuel McAllister had given her a home. And together they had found something neither of them expected: a future worth fighting for, and a family worth keeping forever.